Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installation into our Anti-Federalist Papers series going on number 55. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 54, I would highly encourage you to do so, because understanding the Anti-Federalist Papers, in addition to the Federalist Papers, will provide you a very well-rounded understanding of the U.S. Constitution, and understanding the U.S. Constitution will be absolutely necessary if you intend to combat or defend against any sort of lawfare waged on you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Anti-Federalist Papers. And I forget if I've mentioned where this specific version is provided by, but if you take a quick look, just a quick search on the net for the Anti-Federalist Papers, the first URL is the one providing this version. It's provided by the constitutionalistsociety.org or .com. I can't remember if I've mentioned that in the previous lectures or not, but regardless, there's that source for this specific version. There are a multitude of different institutions that you can get a copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers from. Wherever you get it from, make sure to get a paper and digital copy, just in case you can't access one or the other for whatever infinite number of reasons. While you're out there looking, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and get a paper and digital copy of the Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. I'll be sure for the next lectures to mention the Constitutionalist Society so that we can all be on the exact same page when we're discussing the Anti-Federalist Papers. Excellent. So number 55 is titled, Will the House of Representatives be Genuinely Representative? Part 1. Following are 4 essays by the Federal Farmer. He says this: It being impracticable for the people to assemble to make laws, they must elect legislators and assign men to the different departments of the government. In the representative branch, we must expect chiefly to collect the confidence of the people, and in it to find almost entirely the force of persuasion. In forming this branch, therefore, several important considerations must be attended to. It must possess abilities to discern the situation of the people and of public affairs, a disposition to sympathize with the people, and a capacity and inclination to make laws congenial to their circumstances and condition. It must afford security against interest combinations, corruption, and influence. It must possess the confidence and have the voluntary support of the people. I think these positions will not be controverted, nor the one I formerly advanced, that a fair and equal representation is that in which the interests, feelings, opinions, and views of the people are collected in such manner as they would be were the people all assembled. Having made these general observations, I shall proceed to consider further my principal position, viz., that there is no substantial representation of the people provided for in a government in which the most essential powers, even as to the internal police of the country, are proposed to be lodged, and to propose certain amendments as to the representative branch. The representation is insubstantial and ought to be increased. In matters where there is much room for opinion, you will not expect me to establish my positions with mathematical certainty. You must only expect my observations to be candid, and such as are well-founded in the mind of the writer. I am in a field where doctors disagree, and as to genuine representation, though no feature in government can be more important, perhaps no one has been less understood, and no one that has received so imperfect a consideration by political writers. The Ephori in Sparta, and the tribunes in Rome were but the shadow. The representation in Great Britain is unequal and insecure. In America, we have done more in establishing this important branch on its true principles than perhaps all the world besides. Yet even here, I conceive that very great improvements in representation may be made. In fixing this branch, the situation of the people must be surveyed, and the number of representatives and forms of election apportioned to that situation. When we find a numerous people settled in a fertile and extensive country possessing equality, and few or none of them oppressed with riches or wants, it ought to be the anxious care of the Constitution and laws to arrest them from national depravity and to preserve them in their happy condition. A virtuous people make just laws, and good laws tend to preserve unchanged a virtuous people. A virtuous and happy people, by laws uncongenial to their characters, may easily be gradually changed into servile and depraved creatures. If you're following along in our Discourses Concerning Government series, the novel written by Mr. Algernon Sidney, that principle is pulled directly from Chapter 1, Section 2. where he discusses not only will you find the most compliant individuals whenever the laws are just, but when you have just laws, yes, you will have a compliant populace, but also a happy populace. So make just laws, and obedience from the populace will never be an issue. Where the people or their representatives make the laws, it is probable they will generally be fitted to the national character and circumstances, unless the representation be partial, and the imperfect substitute for the people. However, the people may be electors, if the representation be so formed as to give one or more of the natural classes of men in society an undue ascendancy over others. It is imperfect. The former will gradually become masters, and the latter slaves. It is the first of all among the political balances to preserve in its proper station each of these classes. We talk of balances in the legislature and among the departments of government. We ought to carry them to the body of the people. Since I advanced the idea of balancing the several orders of men in a community, in forming a genuine representation, and seen that idea considered as chimerical, I have been sensibly struck with a sentence in the Mark Vicarius Treatise. I think it's Marquis Vicarius Treatise. This sentence was quoted by Congress in 1774, and it is as follows, quote, "In every society there is an effort continually tending to confer on one part the height of power and happiness, and to reduce the others to the extreme of weakness and misery. The intent of good laws is to oppose this effort and to diffuse their influence universally and equally." Add to this Montesquieu's opinion. We're definitely going to be going over Montesquieu's works, just like we're going over Algernon Sidney's. Montesquieu's opinion that, quote, "In a free state, every man who is supposed to be a free agent ought to be concerned in his own government. Therefore, the legislative should reside in the whole body of the people, or their representatives." It is extremely clear that these writers had in view the several orders of men in society, which we call aristocratical, democratical, mercantile, mechanics, etc., and perceive the efforts they are constantly, from interested and ambitious views, disposed to make to elevate themselves and oppress others. Each order must have a share in the business of legislation actually and efficiently. It is deceiving a people to tell them they are electors and can choose their legislators if they cannot, in the nature of things, choose men from among themselves and genuinely like themselves. I wish you to take another idea along with you. We are not only to balance these natural efforts, but we are also to guard against accidental combinations founded in the connections of offices and private interests, both evils, which are increased in proportion as the number of men among which the elected must be, are decreased. To set this matter in a proper point of view, we must form some general ideas and descriptions of the different classes of men, as they may be divided by occupation and politically. The first class is the aristocratical. There are three kinds of aristocracy spoken of in this country. The first is a constitutional one, which does not exist in the United States in our common acceptation of the word. Montesquieu, it is true, observes that where part of the persons in a society, for want of property, age, or moral character, are excluded any share in the government, the others, who alone are the constitutional electors and elected, form this aristocracy. This, according to him, exists in each of the United States, where a considerable number of persons, as all convicted of crimes, under age, or not possessed of certain property, are excluded any share in the government. The second is an aristocratic faction, a junto of unprincipled men, often distinguished for their wealth or abilities, who combine together and make their object their private interests and aggrandizement. The existence of this description is merely accidental, but particularly to be guarded against. The third is the natural aristocracy. This term we use to designate a respectable order of men, the line between whom and the natural democracy is in some degree arbitrary. We may place men on one side of this line, which others may place on the other, and in all disputes between the few and the many, a considerable number are wavering and uncertain themselves on which side they are, or ought to be. In my idea of our natural aristocracy in the United States, I include about 4,000 or 5,000 men, and among these I reckon those who have been placed in the offices of governors, of members of Congress, and state senators generally, and the principal officers of the army and militia, the superior judges, the most eminent professional men, etc., and men of large property. The other persons and orders in the community form the natural democracy. This includes in general the yeomanry, the subordinate officers, civil and military, the fishermen, mechanics, and traders, many of the merchants and professional men. It is easy to perceive that men of these two classes, the aristocratical and democratical, with views equally honest, have sentiments widely different, especially respecting public and private expenses, salaries, taxes, etc. Men of the first class associate more extensively, have a high sense of honor, possess abilities, ambition, and general knowledge. Men of the second class are not so much used to combining great objects. They possess less ambition and a larger share of honesty. Their dependence is principally on middling and small estates, industrious pursuits, and hard labor, while that of the former is principally on the emoluments of large estates and of the chief offices of government. Not only the efforts of these two great parties are to be balanced, but other interests in parties also, which do not always oppress each other merely for want of power and for fear of the consequences, though they, in fact, mutually depend on each other. Yet such are their general views that the merchants alone would never fail to make laws favorable to themselves and oppressive to the farmers. The farmers alone would act on like principles. The former would tax the land, the latter the trade. This is such a brilliant argument, demonstration of what laissez-faire economics is, but putting it in a political framework. You have to have all of the parties in a free market in order for it to function, and just inherently, those parties will align themselves, and they will depend on each other for the free market to function. The manufacturers are often disposed to contend for monopolies. Buyers make every exertion to lower prices, and sellers to raise them. Brilliantly simplistically put, he basically just summarized all of the 900 pages, at least I think it's 900 pages, of Adam Smith's A Wealth of Nations in that one sentence. Men who live by fees and salaries endeavor to raise them, and the part of the people who pay them endeavor to lower them. The public creditors to augment the taxes and the people at large to lessen them. Thus, in every period of society and in all the transactions of men, we see parties verifying the observation made by the Marquis. And those classes which have not their sentinels in the government, in proportion to what they have to gain or lose, must infallibly be ruined. Efforts among parties are not merely confined to property. They contend for rank and distinctions. All their passions in turn are enlisted in political controversies. Men elevated in society are often disgusted with the changeableness of the democracy, and the latter are often agitated with the passions of jealousy and envy. The yeomanry possess a large share of property and strength, are nervous and firm in their opinions and habits. The mechanics of towns are ardent and changeable, honest and credulous. They are inconsiderable for numbers, weight, and strength, not always sufficiently stable for supporting free governments. The fishing interest partakes partly of the strength and stability of the landed, and partly of the changeableness of the mechanic interest. Of the mechanic interest. Thought I skipped a line for a second. As to merchants and traders, they are our agents in almost all money transactions, give activity to government, and possess a considerable share of influence in it. It has been observed by an able writer that frugal, industrious merchants are generally advocates for liberty. It is an observation, I believe, well-founded that the schools produce but few advocates for republican forms of government. Gentlemen of the law, divinity, physic, etc., probably form about a fourth part of the people. Yet their political influence, perhaps, is equal to that of all the other descriptions of men. What does that sound like? Just in case you were curious, I was learning on the demographic representation of both federal and state governments. About 50%, this is the best, most conservative estimate, about 50% of both branches, government officials, are lawyers. That exact description, despite representing a very small portion of the populace. So if things don't make sense, or there are laws being instituted or implemented that are contrary to the constitutions both federal and state, that explains it. Because every single lawyer in 47 of the 50 states has to go through the American Bar Association. They have to be filtered and indoctrinated by the American Bar Association. So, if you'd like more, go ahead and pick up that novel that I was displaying at the beginning of this lecture. Or if you would like a separate lecture detailing that, I've gone over it a couple of times. I digress. If you'd like to learn more about that, I have that novel. If you want me to post a lecture about it, I've done a couple already, but I'll gladly do another one. If we may judge from the appointments to Congress, the legal characters will often, in a small representation, be the majority. But the more the representatives are increased, the more of the farmers, merchants, etc. will be found to be brought into the government. These general observations will enable you to discern what I intend by different classes, and the general scope of my ideas when I contend for uniting and balancing their interests, feelings, opinions, and views in the legislature. We may not only so unite and balance these as to prevent a change in the government by the gradual exaltation of one part to the depression of others, but we may derive many other advantages from the combination and full representation. A small representation can never be well informed as to the circumstances of the people. The members of it must be too far removed from the people in general to sympathize with them, and too few to communicate with them. A representation must be extremely imperfect where the representatives are not circumstanced to make the proper communications to their constituents, and where the constituents in turn cannot, with tolerable convenience, make known their wants, circumstances, and opinions to their representatives. Where there is but one representative to 30,000 or 40,000 inhabitants, it appears to me he can only mix and be acquainted with a few respectable characters among his constituents. Even double the general representation, and then there must be a very great distance between the representatives and the people in general represented. On the proposed plan, the state of Delaware, the city of Philadelphia, the state of Rhode Island, the province of Maine, the county of Suffolk, and Massachusetts will have one representative each. There can be but little personal knowledge, or but few communications between him and the people at large of either of those districts. It has been observed that mixing only with the respectable men, he will get the best information and ideas from them. He will also receive impressions favorable to their purposes particularly. Could we get over all these difficulties, respecting a balance of interests and party efforts to raise some and oppress others, the want of sympathy, information, and intercourse between the representatives and the people, an insuperable difficulty will still remain. I mean, the constant liability of a small number of representatives to private combinations. The tyranny of the one or the licentiousness of the multitude are, in my mind, but small evils compared with the factions of the few. It is a consideration well worth pursuing how far this House of Representatives will be liable to be formed into private gentos, how far influenced by expectations of appointments in offices, how far liable to be managed by the President and Senate, and how far the people will have confidence in them. Signed, the Federal Farmer. Excellent. So that was all to be said in number 55. If you have any questions, well, get back on my shoulder. If you have any questions about what was said in number 55, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding papers, or if there's a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture is going to be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. Regardless of the topic of the next lecture, until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.